Hello, welcome, and welcome to our Fireside Chat, Caring for Someone with Suicidal Ideation, in honor of Suicide Prevention Month. I'm Jenny Woodworth, a licensed social worker and director of programs with Courage to Caregivers, and I'm so glad to be with you here tonight. I'm going to do a little housekeeping before I get into both what Courage to Caregivers does and what LifeAct does, and introducing you to our speakers. Housekeeping looks like this. We are recording our program tonight, but only our presenters will be recorded. And know that we may not have time for live questions, but if you do have follow-up questions, feel free to add them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that, and they will be deleted following the broadcast, so they won't show up in any recording. Or if you want to ask a question anonymously, you may text us at 216-536-7699 during the live broadcast of this presentation. We did receive questions submitted prior to this event, and we will include as many as we can. We were not able to include all of them in this presentation due to time limitations. You'll receive follow-up information that will hopefully assist you further. I'm going to take just a minute here to tell you a little bit about what Courage to Caregivers does to support family caregivers. We are a nonprofit located in Northeast Ohio with the mission to provide hope, support, and courage to caregivers and loved ones of those living with mental illness. We are now serving caregivers nationwide. We focus exclusively on the caregiver and see ourselves in the caregiver burnout prevention business. We offer 3 programs, currently at no cost to the participant. All programs are now virtual, again, supporting caregivers nationwide. We have a one-to-one caregiver peer support program where we match caregivers in need with trained volunteers who have experience caring for someone living with mental illness. If you feel compelled to help other caregivers, I always need volunteers for this program. Our weekly support groups are co-facilitated by both a licensed social worker or counselor and a trained peer specialist. Our support group model provides essential tools to build a caregiver's resilience. While staffed by professional therapists, we do not provide therapy or counseling. These are more like coaching sessions. Our breathing meditation facilitators are credentialed yoga instructors that incorporate breathing techniques, light yoga movement, guided meditation, and a deep rest, typically a yoga nidra. Our partner agency for tonight is LifeAct, with a mission to provide purposeful mental health education guided by the goal of preventing suicide. Their trained, credentialed instructors deliver LifeAct's in-school educational programs, suicide prevention, and stress management to more than 30,000 Ohio youth every year. Last school year alone, 2,504 students came forward for help after attending our program. LifeAct instructors have presented its life-saving program to more than 230,000, that's a lot, 230, I'm saying it wrong, 1,000 students in more than 200 Ohio schools. Research-based analysis shows that students who experience the program are significantly more likely to seek help for themselves or others. LifeAct teaches students to be the first line of defense in preventing suicide. LifeAct saves children's lives. LifeAct has a dynamic partnership with United University Hospitals, Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital, and Frontline Service, partners who they rely on as vital links in the chain of suicide prevention. They continue to help expand the educational, assessment, and referral services that LifeAct makes available to teens. But LifeAct is not just for students and teens, but for adults as well. Adult programming was established in 2020. It certifies adults in the workplace, educators, and professionals with QPR training, question, persuade, and refer. This training equips adults with tools to help save a life from suicide. Currently, LifeAct is working to expand its programs to reach more individuals with life-saving mental health education. And so now I'd like to introduce our panelists for this evening. They're going to pop on. Yes, beautiful. We have Kara Wright. Kara has a BA in psychology, a master's of education in community counseling, and 20 plus years of working in the field of mental health. Her passion is providing support and services within clients' natural environments, and she's done so with adolescents who were involved with the juvenile justice system, with families and family preservation, and early intervention services. and in schools with student behavioral management and skill building. She's been with LifeAct for almost a year, where she's excited to be a part of the mission as their work is pertinent, relevant, and life-saving. And as it is presented in students' natural environments, it's accessible. We also have Christy Horner, the founder and executive director for Courage to Caregivers. Christy graduated from Denison University with a BA in economics. She is a newly certified family peer support specialist. Throughout her career, she's worked for a variety of nonprofits as director of special events, director of volunteers, and director of admissions. In 2014, she lost her brother to suicide. She had been one of her brother's mental illness long-distance caregiver for 4 years. He lived with depression, anxiety, and obsessive compulsive disorder. As someone who supported someone she loved very much living with mental illness, she knew there had to be a better way to support mental illness caregivers, and the idea for Courage to Caregivers was born. Well, thank you both for being here. I'd like to start with some myth busting. What are some common myths about suicide? What are myths you see in your work, Cara, that you could talk about tonight?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenny. I just want to take a hot moment to thank both you and Christy for including me in this super important discussion. I really honestly had to narrow down the amount of myths that I wanted to bust so that I didn't take up our entire hour. So I'm going to start with the one that I am busting most often, and that is that suicide is not preventable. I want to say that in 4 out of 5 deaths by suicide, there are warning signs. Those deaths by suicide are preceded by warning signs. So I like to explain that to my kids in an 80% type of way. Suicides are preventable. In that vein, here's another one. There's no way of knowing that someone is thinking about planning death by suicide. Again, 80% of the time, warning signs are present. So educating on those warning signs and giving students and giving adults, giving caregivers the tools, a plan of action, what they can do if they see those warning signs. 4 out of 5 of the times, they can prevent that potential death by suicide. Another one, once somebody is thinking about suicide, they're always going to be thinking about suicide. There's nothing that you or I or anyone can do. That is false. We know that in about 66% of those that have completed suicide, they have the underlying diagnosis of depression or some sort of mood disorder. We also know that depression, mood disorders, they are treatable. So if that treatment is given, we can reduce that risk of suicide by almost 100%. So in busting that myth, once somebody is thinking about suicide, they absolutely can get to the place where they no longer believe that that is the only option. It is about connecting to treatment. It is about receiving support. I got 2 more for you, and then I'll stop talking.
Yeah.
A lot of my students think that talking about suicide or asking the suicide question is going to lead somebody to suicide. And quite frankly, that is completely 100% false. In fact, talking about it, bringing up the question, engaging somebody who is struggling, who might be thinking about death by suicide, demonstrating those warning signs, that's often a way to open the door to treatment. It's a way to feel relief. Again, a lot of these people who are thinking about suicide have those underlying mood disorders. And with those underlying mood disorders come a lack of hope. So just by asking that question and explaining that, hey, it can get better, I'm here for you, that can bring a whole bunch of relief and a whole bunch of opportunity to come in and provide that support and that treatment. So I will say it again, asking the question, talking about suicide does not put the idea in someone's mind. You simply cannot do that. I like to tell my kids, you don't have the power to do that.
Yeah.
Someone is either thinking that that is a solution or they are not. And the last one is that a lot of people believe there's a typical profile for a person who may be thinking about suicide, at risk for suicide, complete suicide. And quite frankly, there is not. I like to share with my kids that anyone and everybody can be impacted by mental illness, can be impacted by suicide in some way or another. It doesn't matter your gender. It doesn't matter your sexual orientation. It doesn't matter your race, your ethnicity, your socioeconomic status. Anybody can be at risk for suicide. There is not one particular group who is impacted in a biological way more than another group. Now, there are environmental things. There are different, groups of people who may be more at risk given the types of stigmas that exist in our culture, given the types of support or lack of support that they receive. But from a biological human standpoint, we are all at equal risk. Again, I could go on and on. Those are my top 5 myths that I
thanks. Thanks for busting those. Christy, do you have any to add to that pretty comprehensive list?
She hit all the ones that I had. I've experienced all of those before I knew, and was so grateful. You very inclusive. Thank you, Cara.
Great. Thank you both. So you mentioned the word stigma, Cara. I wonder if you could talk to me. Well, actually, Christy, first, if you don't mind, if you could talk to me a little about language and stigma around suicide. And then, Cara, we'll have a chance for you too. What is stigma? Christy, do you have a definition of that on your...
Well, I'm not sure I have a definition. I think that, and I'll speak about it from the caregiver perspective, of course. And I think Cara can, you have so much experience with your students and behavioral health wise. I think that stigma essentially is this taboo topic of mental health, mental illness. Often people don't like to talk about it. It feels scary, mostly because they don't understand or know. And it's the same thing for suicide. I just don't know. It's so scary. For all the myths you've already said, there becomes this stigma and shame really around it that people don't know often how to support you, how to talk to you about it. Even if you're the caregiver, let alone the person with the challenges or who's feeling suicidal. So often what in my experience before, as I was supporting my brother, it was, oh gosh, I don't know what to say or do. So it's either I'll say something that's inappropriate or I'm just not going to say anything at all. And then as a caregiver, I never felt completely supported. I had my sisters, which was beautiful and a fantastic support network. And we had each other, but we, our network of friends didn't have the right vocabulary. Then there was often this stigma and language that goes around suicide that can become can only fuel the shame and exasperate the stigma instead of starting to reduce it. I think by talking about it and naming it as mental health and mental illness is really important. That's how we start to reduce the stigma around it and normalizing it as well. People say, committed suicide often. And that was one of the first things that I had to learn as well, which was died by suicide or completed suicide. Because when you use the word commit with the word suicide as a verb, it's as if you intentionally wanted to do something. And if there's anything we know about suicide, it's that mostly people don't want to end their lives. They want to end the pain. And I learned that from my LifeAct friend, Lori Vick, actually. And it helped me to make so much more sense as I was supporting my brother, that this was all outside my control. And yet understanding the pain is what was leading him to these thoughts. And again, it's not for everyone, but in our case, that was the situation. It helped so much to understand that's where I needed to focus some of my energy and language. So changing that language specifically about losing commit when we talk about suicide and how we reduce the stigma is doing exactly what Cara said, talking about it like we are tonight. So thank you.
Yeah.
Cara, I bet you have even more.
Yeah, I'm sure. Go ahead, please.
I mean, you saw me frantically shaking my head. I agreed with so much of what you were saying. I like to spend a good amount of time at the end of my presentation talking to specifically my high schoolers about the stigma around mental illness, around suicide. I like to explain to them that stigma is defined as these negative ideas that really have no founding in truth, that as a culture we believe to be true, right? And I like to do a little myth busting with them before I jump into chatting with them about what we can do to start breaking down that stigma. And I often will say things like, there are a lot of stigmas around mental illness. For example, people think that if you are diagnosed with a mental illness or struggling with a mental illness, you must be weak. You must not be able to take care of your business, right? Or if you are diagnosed with a mental illness, you will be crazy for the rest of your life, right? So I like to let them know that the stigma is based in those kind of false beliefs, right? And then try to provide them with facts to bust those beliefs, those widely held beliefs. And I explained to them that the reason we need to break down the stigma is because I had just spent 90 plus minutes chatting with them about the importance of talking with their friends
Yeah.
about their mental health, right? So how can we do that if it's not a comfortable thing to do? How can we implement these tools if it's not a comfortable thing to do? And talking about how all of us as a part of this shared culture have a responsibility to break down that stigma. So I like to show them, because they're young, a whole bunch of famous faces who are doing amazing things in the world. For example, The Rock, for example, Billie Eilish, and share with them that these are successful people that are successful, not despite their mental illness, but in addition to living with a mental illness. So we start there and then we move into, breaking down that suicide word and the stigma associated not just with mental illness, but suicide. And I just give them a brief history lesson. I talk to them about how that word, yes, is scary, how it's been around since the 1600s, right? That it's had a lot of negative press surrounding it. There have been through the decades, through the centuries, a lot of moral implications, that have been passed down and attached to this word. For example, if one completes suicide, one will be banished to hell, right? Like I like to talk about why we've gotten to this place, right? I like talk about also how there were so many false beliefs around the fact that those who think about death by suicide or even complete suicide, they're selfish. They're not thinking about it's none of those things. To your point, Christy, suicide quite simply is a word describing what somebody believes to be a solution to an unsolvable problem, right? That underlying mental illness becomes so intense. There is that lack of hope that one can ever feel better, that pain can ever go away, that they're stuck there, that they're alone, right? And the only solution to that must be to end it. So quite simply, that's what suicide is. That's what the word is. And I try to just break it down in the way that I tried to just do for you guys, right? Make it digestible, help my kiddos to understand this is how we got here. This is what we can do now. And this is where we need to look as we all move forward collectively as a culture if we want to drive these statistics down, if we want to save lives, right?
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Excellent.
I wonder if you could talk to me a little bit, Kara, about warning signs of suicide. And this is kind of a two-part question because I want to talk about warning signs, and then maybe if you can add, do these vary in children and adolescents compared to adults? Whether we can talk about that a little bit. So please.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are, in general, categories that I like to start with that are like the top three buckets of warning signs, right? So the first one is intense anger or sadness. That is where I explain to the kids that I'm not talking about regular, ordinary sadness, the emotion of sadness. I'm talking about depression, the mental illness, right? Again, 2/3 of those people who have died by suicide have that underlying diagnosis. So, depression, mood disorders in and of themselves are a risk factor, a warning sign for suicide. Um, there is also the catch-all of withdrawing from things that one typically did or enjoyed doing. And this is where I explain to my kiddos, these are going to look different for everybody. So there's no way for me to give you an exhaustive list here, but I give them lots of examples, right? Like some people are super quick typically to snap back or text back or be on social media. All of a sudden they're not. Like that would cause you to scratch your head, right? Or you've got a friend who is always getting A's, always the first person to school, and all of a sudden is failing their classes. So this is, what I'm talking about when I talk about withdrawing from things that they typically once enjoyed or once were good at. I also explain that it could be a small change as opposed to a big change like that, like an energy shift almost. I like to remind my kiddos that this isn't brain science. You know your friends, and you know if something's off. If something's off and you feel that, chances are something's off. So let's jump into what we can do to really assess that risk. And we'll get to that in a bit. But moving on. So we have that depression as a warning sign and all of those signs and symptoms that come with depression. We have withdrawing from things that one typically, was very good at or loved doing. And then we have the talking about suicide, which all my kids are like, duh, of course. But I like to point out that it's typically not a, hey, by the way, I'm really thinking of killing myself discussion. It's not that at all. A lot of times kids will use coded language, but a lot of times they'll use it, right? Like you talk to, relatives, caregivers, friends who are left behind after a loved one has completed suicide. And a lot of times through the benefit of hindsight, they will say, oh yeah, I did hear this, or I heard something that sounded like this, or, oh yeah, they were saying things like, I wish I could just go to sleep and never wake up. So we talk about that importance of deciphering that coded language, right? So those are my big three that I like to talk about. And then I break them down, like I said, into examples. I also go through the symptoms of depression and in general mood disorders so that the kids can see the overlap of what those symptoms are and translate them to warning signs, because in fact they are. Another big one that I don't typically talk about with my kiddos, but I will share with you all, is a history of suicidal thinking or ideation. That is a risk factor as well. A lot of times, again, those that are diagnosed with, living with a mental illness, treatment will be interrupted. Treatment may not be completed. There might be something else that occurs that brings an episode back, and that person can get back there because that person's been there before. Our brains are like, muscles. They kind of form memories in that way. So that's another warning sign. I will say that there's not a ton of difference in my experience between warning signs that kids demonstrate versus warning signs that adults demonstrate, with the exception of a couple of things. Adults will typically demonstrate more sadness with mental illness, specifically depression, versus anger. Kids will typically demonstrate that underlying mood disorder as anger outbursts and not so much that sadness. Adults are more likely to abuse substances. So that can be a warning sign if it is utilized in a way to cope with pain, if it is a dependence. I do bring up substance use as a warning sign when I talk to the kids, as I give them examples, right? And I try to help them understand this is not, drinking on a Friday night. Some of these kids are 18 and it's a reality, right? I talk about how there can be a need. Some people feel that need to numb the pain with the use of substances, even numb that pain with the use of self-injury. So again, going back to adults, you will see potentially more sadness as opposed to anger with that underlying mood disorder. And adults do tend to utilize substances more than kiddos do. And I think that that is a warning sign that can't be ignored.
Mhm.
Could you, I don't want to make assumptions about people knowing symptoms of depression. Would you mind going over those real fast?
Sure. Yeah, not a problem.
That's a good idea.
Again, depression is characterized as something that lasts for 2 or more weeks. Okay, so you got to start there. And I let my kiddos know this is something that's not fleeting. It is not that emotion of sadness or anger. It is something that is overarching, like a big old dark cloud for 2 or more weeks. It is something that stays with and doesn't go away when even the thing that you think caused it is resolved and it's still in you. Um, it is also something ultimately to be diagnosed. It's something that impacts one's ability to go about their daily life, to function. That's where that withdrawing from things that one likes to do, that's where that kind of overlap occurs. So that daily functioning is interrupted when this depression occurs. Additional symptoms include sleeping a lot or not sleeping at all, eating a lot or not eating at all, um, not being able to focus, feeling bodily aches and pains, lack of energy, um, substance use can fall under there as one of the things, that can be used to help with diagnosis. Self-injury can be as well. But ultimately, it is an overarching sadness or anger that lasts 2+ weeks that impacts somebody's ability to function and may or may not include some of those symptoms that, again, I think you'll agree, given the discussion we just had, are really similar to those warning signs of
For
suicide.
sure.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you so much for adding that bit of clarification.
Mhm.
Christy, anything you'd like to add about warning signs?
Well, I think you covered them all. I think that for me, not having a behavioral health background, so just a regular sister on that moment when our brother reached out for help, we didn't have a lot of experience, clinical experience, really understanding depression. So I really value that LifeAct's programs works with middle and high school students to start teaching them early about these things and what to look for and have them be aware of them as red flags. I really do think that would have helped equipped us along the way. Some of the things that we saw that are really hard to distinguish is this concept of helplessness and hopelessness. But there's a big difference between someone who says, "Ugh, I can't get my computer to work today,"
Mm.
versus that. I think the real key there is that longevity. So looking that over time, feeling very helpless and hopeless about the outcome for your life.
Yeah.
And Jenny and I do another presentation and focus entirely on hope because I believe in it so much. It's such a distinguishing factor for those living with suicidal ideation. And we as caregivers can also be hope givers. So I encourage you to reach out if you notice helplessness or hopelessness because we can give hope to others and we can rebuild that for those in our care. I think the other thing that's really important is that my brother was riddled with negative self-talk.
Mm.
And I wouldn't have said he had a lack of confidence necessarily, but riddled with negative self-talk to the point where he had convinced himself of all these negative things. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I'm not this. I'm all this negativity. And he literally, those voices, and he did not live with schizophrenia. He lived with anxiety, depression, and obsessive compulsive disorder. But that negative self-talk consumed him. He literally obsessed about those, that he convinced himself of some really negative things. And so learning how, for me as the caregiver, learning how to work with those negative self-talk, he also didn't process his emotions. And I think we all know, as caregivers, those who can very healthily manage their emotions with healthy coping strategies for stress and those who cannot. And so as a caregiver, I was trying to manage my own stress of caregiving
Mhm.
and manage his emotional stress that he was not managing at all. So it becomes very mixed up with the caregiver. Um, then there's the withdrawal and isolation, like you mentioned with the teens, and I think that that's really important as adults. If we stop seeing someone, that we're checking in on them, that we're asking,
Mhm.
"Where have you been? I've missed you. I've noticed that you're missing." And the alcohol and drugs, you nailed it. I mean, that's what happens, right? That they just mask that. That's the unhealthy coping strategy for stress with alcohol and any kind of, recreational or prescription drugs. So you covered it very well, but those things as caregivers, we may notice them, but they're really hard to process. So I guess I know that Jenny, any caregiver that came to us with the level of concern, we would immediately refer them to clinical professional help because that I we know that therapy is an essential form of taking care of your own health and well-being, both as the caregiver and for our loved ones.
Absolutely. I just want to jump in and say you nailed it on the hope piece,
Mm,
Christy. I think that, and I do like to tell my kiddos, if you do anything, if you forget everything that I've
I
talked
know.
about,
So
if
hard.
you do anything, just try to normalize a
Yeah.
friend who is struggling,
Mhm.
normalize their experience, and tell them that help is available. If
Yeah.
you can just give them hope, you have done most of the work. That's what
Yeah.
all this is about, right?
It
And
is.
um, it does impact all the other things that you said.
Yeah.
Hope, impacts one's thoughts of themselves. Hope, gives somebody motivation to maybe try again the next day and succeed. It's just so impactful in so many ways. So,
Yeah. Hope is a verb, as we say in the presentation we do. And I really, you saying the word normalizing, Kara, I mean, that a lot of the work we do in general at Courage to Caregivers is normalizing experiences and behaviors and all those things. But yeah, normalizing this experience that you are not alone. You are not the only person who's had these thoughts. I mean, that's a life-saving bit. I'm so glad that's something you say. Here's your thing, if anything, because they might not be listening for your presentation until you're like, hey, right here. So this is the meat now. This is when it gets scary for people. They're like, oh, okay, gosh, I've seen some of these warning signs, and now what? Like, I can't just bury my head in the sands. Like, what do you do? What is a plan of action if you have seen these warning signs in a loved one? And Kara, I'm going to start with you, please.
yeah, absolutely. I can appreciate that it is super scary to know what to do. It is super scary to launch into helping somebody who may be demonstrating these warning signs because one might feel as if they have their life in their hands, right? And again, explaining to my kiddos that that is certainly not the case at all. All you are responsible for doing is being a friend to someone you have chosen to be a friend to. I like to put it that way, right? It really is quite simple, and I really break it down for my kiddos. There's 3 things I ask them to do, and I use the acronym we do at LifeAct. ACT, ACT, which stands for acknowledge, care, and tell. Acknowledge a problem, acknowledge a change, acknowledge something is off. I like to say to my kiddos, you don't even have to remember acknowledge. It's a big old word. As long as you realize that the act of acknowledging is simply just the act of getting a conversation going, right? And then care kind of keeps the conversation going. We all know how to care for our friends or we wouldn't have them, right? We don't turn our back, we lend an ear, we perhaps empathize, we hug, we do the things that come naturally within our relationships. That's where we offer the hope. That's where we normalize the experience. That's where we might even say, as a result of being a part of this Life Act presentation, hey, treatment is available. It can be okay, right? And then the T, meaning talk to a trusted adult. And we talk about why that is, right? I have a colleague, Elaine, you might know her, Christy. She's been at LifeAct
Yeah.
since like essentially the beginning.
Right.
And she likes to say to the kiddos, it's not that adults are inherently smarter than kids. It's just that adults have the benefit of fully developed brains. They have some context, they have some experience, they have maybe some connections out in the world to know what to do. If somebody is struggling. So we really impart the necessity to bring an adult into the situation if a kiddo is worried about their friend. We also talk about the reality of how that is. A lot of these friends aren't willingly going to go and talk to an adult on their behalf, and they're going to tell their worried friend, I don't want you to go talk to an adult. And we talk about how it's necessary to do so because that underlying mental illness is treatable and that risk for suicide can be reduced to almost none, right? But also because research has shown, experience has shown that going to talk to an adult on behalf of a friend, yeah, may make that friend mad if that friend does not want that talk to occur. But usually that friend ends up feeling relieved, cared for, loved, and grateful within days' time. Because again, that friend has no hope, doesn't believe things can get better. So why go talk to somebody? Why share my business? As soon as that friend feels the hope that things can get better, that friend's like, thank you, Jesus. Thank you for going to talk to, like really reiterating that it's not an easy thing to do, but you can do this. And let's talk about how you can do it. Right. So that's quite simply what I tell my kiddos to do. Act, acknowledge, care, tell. I will quickly distinguish the difference between how I educate my kiddos and how I educate adults. You mentioned the QPR process. That stands for question, persuade, and refer, right? So should an adult see a kid or maybe even another adult that they are close with or in connection with in some way, right? That adult can question if everything's okay. It's similar to acknowledge, right? Persuade that person to get some help for themselves, similar to caring with that little twist of, hey, I can't so much do this for you because you're an adult. Let's go and do this because I'm going to educate you, and then refer. So getting that help, because again, adults have that experience, those fully developed brains, they can find those referrals. So that's how I like to educate my adults, with that proven QPR method.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, Christy.
I think Carrie, you bring up a really important differentiator for Jenny and I, as well as helping professionals. And of course, both of you have important letters behind your names that we do have a responsibility to break confidentiality when we know someone has the intention to harm themselves or others. And so I bet that working with your youth, you can kind of make that a similar analogy that says, you're a great friend and I would never break your confidentiality unless, and here's why this is so important. And we say that at the beginning of every single one of our support groups because it's just that important as peers. And I know for plan of action, when someone said to me, you'll need to get a care plan in place. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, what does that mean? What is a care plan? How do I do that as a caregiver to my brother? And especially with someone who may not, who may be reticent to getting the help that they need. Because again, with youth who are minors living with parents, they have a little more influence. With adults who are not accepting of their underlying conditions, who are not accepting, who want to manage it themselves. I've got this. I can handle it. I've got you, after all. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm your sister. I am not a professional. And so that was one of the hardest struggles we faced as a family, was getting him the help, the professional help that we knew that he needed beyond our caring support. Identifying that plan of action. And so the things that we might say to the caregivers in our care now are things like, hey, why don't I drive you to your first appointment and I'll just wait for you in the car? Or, let's talk through what this might be like, your first appointment. And as you're getting used to it, I'll just be here on the wings. I'm not going to go in with you. I'm just going to be here to make sure you get there. And that if anything's upsetting, I'm happy to drive you home. at the end. So we can be there as a supporter with the professional who's really going to outline the care plan. Now, with the minor, we also know that caregivers, because we advocate for caregivers, caregivers have a right to understand and know that care plan because they're a vital, essential piece to that care plan. It's as if you're the accountability partner to make sure that those things are happening. As a sibling or as an adult, supporting an adult, or even college students for that matter, we know from HIPAA, right? Our rights change at after 18. And yet we very much, as someone who cares and loves very much someone living with these things, want to be a part of that plan.
Mhm.
So we might change our language to something along the lines of, gosh, how did your appointment go? What are you working towards? What are your goals? And how can I support you? And quite often, what my brother would finally, it took a while for to find the words and the groove between us. He just needed us to listen.
Mm.
So we got trained in listening real fast because he didn't want opinions. He didn't want any advice. And he didn't want us to tell him what to do. He needed us to listen. And so we became those listeners to hear some really hard, horrible things, but to listen. And what I missed then was seeking my own professional help in that moment to unpack what I heard, because that I didn't realize in the moment was so painful and hard. And so that's a regret of mine, but that now we can share with others that as caregivers, you need help too, because what is shared with you can be very, very difficult. This conversation tonight might be very difficult for others. So if it's
Mhm.
triggering to you, please seek help. Please seek a professional. So getting a plan of action with a professional is essential. Knowing that that's hard, we do have some tools on our own website around helping people get that help, including some links. NAMI has a really good crisis planning document and some excellent resources. AFSP also has some excellent resources for, again, creating plans of action and crisis planning, because it's always better to plan in advance what to do if you're faced with some of those crises or are having a difficult time with your loved one to create a plan of action for their mental health and wellness. So that's all I would have to add. But you really covered a lot of ways that peers can really help each other and how they can go to a trusted, safe adult to get some help in processing that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you both. I love providing people with tools. That's one of my goals with every presentation. So if you're watching this, grab a piece of paper and a pencil because I want to get real specific here. Kara, what are questions to ask if you believe someone is thinking about suicide?
So it depends. It depends on what you're seeing, what you've seen, and the level of engagement you've had thus far. I
Okay.
like to differentiate for the kids that I'm instructing the difference between someone who is at risk versus someone who might be in crisis and what that means, right? Someone who is at risk for suicide is demonstrating some of those warning signs, is maybe dealing with a mental health diagnosis, a mood disorder of some sort. It is not as essential to be time sensitive, right? You have some time to talk with them to understand where they're at. That being said, if someone is in crisis or you really believe that they are down that road, they are thinking that suicide may be the answer to this unimaginable pain. They really are demonstrating a lot of warning signs. They really are struggling. I tell my kids, you got to ask the question. You got to ask it. You have to ask, are you thinking about dying? Are you thinking about hurting or killing yourself? I actually tell them, don't ask the hurt part, just ask the kill part. Because as hard as it is to say the words,
Mhm.
you want a black and white
Mhm.
delivery, right? So I then reiterate that that is not going to trigger a friend or anyone who is thinking about suicide either is or they are not. You're not going to put the idea into their head. It is not an easy question to ask, but I believe it is truly the best question to ask. I even get nervous to ask it after all of these years. I've asked it so
Mhm.
many times, and I can
Mhm.
acknowledge with the kids that it's nerve-wracking to ask because you don't wanna hear the answer and you don't know what you're gonna do if the answer is yes, and, oh my gosh, like, then is it my responsibility? All of those things come flooding in, right? And I know that you can talk more to this, from the perspective of a caregiver, Christy. But just in education with the kids, you ask the question, you realize that you're not putting any ideas in anyone's head, and you ask it with the intent to help someone you care about, to help someone you're connected with, and you ask it with the intent of potentially saving their life. You
Mhm.
don't have their life in your hands. You are merely trying to get them the help that they need. That is your responsibility. You are not a therapist. You are not a doctor. You are not any of those things, but you are a caring friend. So you're asking the question in that vein. Hey, are you thinking of killing yourself? And then I go on to chat with my kiddos about what to do if they hear the yes, additional questions they can ask. Um, I know not all instructors do this. I do this. I tell my kiddos and I give them permission to ask a follow up question. Do you have a plan? The reason I give permission to my kiddos to ask that question is that if you get a yes to that one, you best be dialing 911. Do not leave. They've thought about it enough and they know how they're going to do it. And regardless of whether they have the means to do it, you need help and you need it now, right? If you get a no to that question, meaning, yes, I am thinking of killing myself, but no, I don't have a plan. You know that it is not as critical to act in a timely, it's not as time sensitive, right? But you need to do something and you need to do it probably right there, connect them with someone who's going to follow up with them, provide them that treatment. So I give those concrete questions, those concrete paths of action. And specifically, that is around someone who is in crisis. As I teed all of this up, I like to help my kiddos to determine when these questions need to be asked and what might be happening to create that crisis situation that results in these questions. Now, going back to your original question, Jenny, what are some other questions, that people can ask? Um, Beyond asking the question, people can do along with what Christy was saying, how can I help you? You are not yourself. You seem very upset. You've been really down. I've missed you. How can I help you? What can I do to support you? Hey, let's do this together. As you are acting, acknowledging, caring, and
Mhm.
getting ready to talk to an adult, those are some questions that can be asked. And again, it's not rocket science. We care about our friends. We know that these are questions we can ask in the act of caring. It's being given the permission to actually go there. I think stigma keeps us, confusion, fear, just,
Mhm.
not knowing keeps us from doing the things that might come natural with any other thing, right? Like if my daughter is not feeling well and has a fever, I'm going to ask her all those questions.
Mhm.
Tangible. I can see it. It's more, culturally accepted to be sick with COVID, even as opposed to be sick with depression, right? So just really normalizing that this is as much as we've been told it's not okay to be depressed, it's really okay to not be okay. And it's really okay
Mhm.
to ask these questions and to dig in there. And you're not going to make someone sicker and you're not going to make someone sadder and you're not going to make anyone anything that they're not already. But you are going to be able to decipher what type of role you can have, what type of help, assistance you can give. I hope that answered your
Yeah,
question. I go off
no,
on
it's
tangents, so.
very helpful. Thank you. Christy, anything to add? Questions to ask if you believe someone is thinking about completing suicide?
No, I had training before my brother originally called with his suicidal ideation, so I did know enough to ask those 3 questions of adults, and I understand it's different based on the level of crisis, but, he called and basically said, "I'm thinking of ending my life. So then he's already answered the first question for us. So then you ask about, do you have a plan? Because that tells you what needs to happen next. And if it's yes, then, or no, then okay, you know where the level of crisis is. But if it's yes, you do need to ask if you have the means to execute that plan. Because for us, that was a really essential question. And that's when we realized, okay, we're not in crisis at this moment. And then it became, let's stay on the phone, let's talk as the emotions came down. Knowing that that everyone should have the National Suicide and Crisis line in your phone, and it's easier than ever to remember. It's now 988, so it's easier to remember. It doesn't have to be a contact in your phone. Everyone can remember 988, so that you can call 988 to get immediate crisis support, and that's for caregivers and our loved ones. That being said, if there's a plan and the means to execute on that plan, then you actually are calling 911, but you're staying on the phone with your loved one. So you've got to find someone with an extra phone. You're calling 911 to get to them as quickly as possible, because that's a different level of crisis support that's necessary. Often in our experience, that just talking and hearing someone's voice out of love and unconditional love and support is what they're looking for in that moment, to be wrapped around and say, I hear you, I see your pain, I hear your pain, I'm here to listen, so that they have someone to share. And then just remember that when you hang up, you will also need support, that you cannot take that in and take that on entirely yourself. I'm wondering, Cara, if, as you're listening to all these students and teaching them, what do you do for support? Because you're really a professional caregiver in this regard, as Jenny is. What do you do?
So I love that you just asked me that question, because as you've been speaking tonight, you've been so consistent and thorough in the encouragement of caregivers to take care of themselves. I know that to be a necessity, but like most of us, I'm busy and I don't prioritize it, right? So I was literally just sitting here thinking, man, I think I need to take care of myself a little bit better. But to answer your question, I do try to do yoga regularly, and I do talk to a counselor regularly. I am one of those people who worked as a counselor for years and years and years, but never thought that I could benefit from counseling. And I'm here to say everybody can benefit from counseling. So yes, I do take care of myself in that way. So, but I can do better. And I love that you've given me permission to do that, because you've been super consistent in saying that. And I think that caregivers absolutely need that permission. It is not about always worrying about the person we are providing care for. We can't be our best selves if we are not taking care of ourselves. So I think that's just so important.
Without a doubt. And it's about giving our loved ones the best of us instead of what's left of us. It's one of my favorite quotes. So
yeah.
Thank you for sharing what you do to take care of yourself.
Absolutely.
Jenny, what do you do to take care of yourself? Because you hear a lot of pain. You hear a lot of stories of pain.
I do. So I try to get outside. I try to change my perspective, especially if I'm on Zoom for a couple hours and I've heard some tough stuff, or, I just like to be somewhere else besides a desk and computer. I have a burgeoning meditation practice. It's helpful and really easier than I thought it would be. And I only say that because I've fought it for years. And now I'm just trying to literally sit with it and say, here you are. Okay.
That's
quiet.
great.
And now keep trying. Practice. Instead of being perfect, I think I've had that challenge. Everything had to be perfect. I had to be on a mountaintop with my fingers like this. And that's not the case.
I love that.
No, that's how I operate too. And I keep hearing, because I'm kind of newish to the world of Peloton, they always say things like progress, not perfection. They give you like all of this motivation to just get out there and dip your toe in and just try it. 5 minutes is better than 50. And man, it's taken me a long time, but I think I'm finally at that place too, where we can just like take our time, ease in, progress, not perfection, right?
Yep. Gentle. Just be gentle with yourself.
Yep.
A couple more questions. We're ending, we're coming on our hour. So I want to kind of change just a little bit. So, Kara, in your work with adolescents, what if, I came to you and my kid's worried about a classmate or someone in school complete suicide? How can I, as a parent, support my child?
I honestly think, and I am going to think about the answer to this question as both a professional, but also as a parent, because I
Yeah.
am a parent. Um, I honestly think it's exactly what we've been talking about thus far. It is opening the doors to conversation. It is saying, hey, I heard that this happened, or, oh, I'm so sorry that you're so worried about a friend. Let's talk about what you're seeing. Let's figure out how not only I can support you, but how you can support your friend. What might your friend need? So, really, just kind of going through that same step by step process. Again, ACT is a fancy way of really breaking down, starting a conversation, keeping a conversation going, and finding help, right? That's all it is.
Yeah.
So, I think that as parents, um, being given the permission to have these types of tough conversations with their kiddos without the fear that they are going to create extreme stress, duress,
Yeah.
sadness,
Mhm.
extra burden on their kids. Because again, they are not necessarily going to do that. That is either being felt already or it's not. Having the conversation enables that person who is doing the supporting, in this situation, the kiddo, right? It enables the kiddo to know that he's got an extra trusted adult. He's got an extra person in his corner. He's got, the permission to not be okay and come home and be sad and, oh, please help me, mom, because I know you're going to talk to me. So it really is just a matter of kind of following the same path that we've been talking about, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. Thank you so much. Christy, I want to talk a little bit about the ripple effect. So, as you well know, at Courage to Caregivers, we discuss how anyone in that ripple is outside that caring dyad of like the caregiver and their loved one. But so that's like extended family, neighbors, friends, communities. So, Christy, if you're outside of that caring dyad, how can you support caregivers of those with suicidal ideation?
It kind of goes back to that stigma and the myths we talked about at the beginning, which is, ask, um, how can I support you? The thing you don't want to say is, oh, I'm here whenever you need me, so give me a call.
Mhm.
It's kind of like the same way in managing those who've suffered severe loss or grief. So it's instead, I'm here for you. I want you to know that. And what do you need? What do you need today? Might be different than what you need tomorrow or next week, which they can
Mhm.
probably not think about. But what do you need today? And just sit with them and listen to what they might need today. And they may not be able to identify what they need because as caregivers, most humans are horrible at identifying what they need. So getting them to think about, well, I want you to think about what you need. Okay. Or I'm going to the grocery store.
Mhm.
What do you need? Oh, I'm fine, is what you'll probably hear. And instead, hey, I know you love apples. Can I pick up a dozen of your favorite apples? And they might say, well, I already have a lot of apples. Well, what about bananas? Bananas don't last very long. So you just start a conversation to help them to identify what they need and then how you can support them. And recognizing that they know how much they mean to you,
Mhm.
how much you love them unconditionally. And maybe it's, let's go for a walk. I just want to be with you. Let's go for a walk. We can talk about it if you want, or we can not talk about it because you're done
Yeah.
talking about it, right?
Mhm.
We hear that all the time. I just don't want to talk
Mhm.
about caregiving anymore. I want to
Mhm.
talk about let's look at the devastation from the hurricane. Look what's happening there. It's easier to deflect sometimes to talk about other pain than your own pain because you're tired of talking about your own pain. And then, hey, I just heard this great fireside chat. I heard about two wonderful organizations. Have you heard about them? Let me share something with you. Sharing a book or your favorite article. And it can be about caregiving, or some of my favorite things that people supported me were they sent me funny memes and texts, or someone sent me a funny book that made me laugh, or a great movie suggestion to get me out of my head and thinking about something completely different. But it reminded me that they were there, they were thinking about me, and they loved me.
Hmm. That's a great answer. Thank you. Cara, anything to add to this?
I just want to say I appreciate that you made that distinction, Christy, about not keeping it vague. Hey, call me whenever you need me, but really putting a tangible element to that support. Like, hey, I know that you like apples. I'm going to the store. Let me pick you up some. Really just showing in a specific kind of concrete, kind of here and now way that you're there for them. Because, like you said, humans are really bad at identifying what they need and really bad a lot of times at reaching out for help. But if you put yourself in there in specific ways that can be supportive, what a beautiful thing. So I do love that you made that distinction.
Great. Well, I want to close tonight just talking, and we talked about a little bit, we taking care of yourself as a caregiver and finding the support that you need. Any closing thoughts about that as we wrap up for this evening? Either of you. Cara, go if you've got any.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I defer to you, Christy.
Yeah.
Well, I just think that, as Jenny will now be found to be saying, don't be like Christy was, right? Because during those 4 hard years, I did not take care of myself. I put 100% of my energy into my brother. I thought I could save him from himself.
Yeah.
It's another myth. Someone else can save you. I could not save him, but I didn't recognize it or understand it at the time. And so I took it all on myself. And I did have my sisters, which was beautiful, but you you can't save someone from themselves. What you can do is be aware. What you can do is to talk about it and equip yourself with all the resources that we didn't know about,
Mm.
and come up for air. Remember, as we've all shared our favorite go-to coping strategies, step away from the computer. Get yourself out of your head. Caregivers are so good at spending their time in their head. Get into your body. So whether that's a walk, fresh air, a run if you're a runner, yoga, tai chi, anything to get into your body and out of your head, you will immediately bring down your parasympathetic nervous system and immediately start to reduce your stress. For me, it's nature and my dogs. Taking them for a hike in the woods are just all the beautiful things. And so finding those healthy coping strategies that work for you, that feel right for you. And then the icing on the cake for me is to bring a friend along. And sometimes I can just be found with my headphones calling a friend I haven't seen for a while out of town, or sometimes it's someone in town. So if you can make it social and connect with another person and get into your body and out of your head, you're still doing justice to both your own health and well-being, and then that allows us to be our best self, to care for others and bring that forward.
Yep. And I think the only thing I can add is that you are not selfish as a caregiver. If you need to step away and take care of yourself, you do not need to give 100% of your time, energy, life to saving someone else. So take that time, give yourself that time. Don't beat yourself up for that time. Right.
Yes. Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. Again, this is a topic that can be challenging, but this is a brave and courageous conversation that we're having tonight. So thanks again, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.